Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our webinar, Building Policy Momentum for Family, Friend, and Neighbor Care. Next slide, please. Today, we will be practicing language justice, and I am very excited to welcome Elizabeth to share a little bit more information about our simultaneous translation and interpretation.
Thank you. I will begin in Spanish and then repeat in English. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Elizabeth y seré su intérprete de español e inglés con la Cooperativa de Idiomas de la Comunidad. Estoy aquí para ayudar a crear un espacio donde practicamos un compromiso con la justicia del lenguaje, lo cual significa que todas las personas tienen derecho a participar en el idioma de su corazón o en el idioma en el que se sientan más cómodos. Una vez que termine de hablar, activaremos la función de interpretación. En ese momento, elija su idioma preferido en la barra de herramientas en la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom, presionando el icono del globo terráqueo. Si nos acompaña desde un dispositivo móvil, haga clic en los tres puntitos a la derecha de su pantalla que dice más o more. Si es bilingüe en ambos idiomas, no es necesario elegir uno. Muchas gracias. Ahora repito este mensaje en inglés y luego comenzamos. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, and I will be your Spanish-English interpreter with the Community Language Cooperative. I'm here to help create a space where we practice a commitment to language justice, which means that all people have the right to participate in the language of their heart or the language that they feel most comfortable in. Once I finish speaking, we will turn on the interpretation function. At that time, please choose your preferred language on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen by pressing the globe icon. If you are joining us from a mobile device, click the three dots to the right of your screen that say More. If you are fully bilingual in both languages, you do not need to select one. Thank you so much. Can the host please turn on interpretation at this time?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome, everybody. My name is Natalie Renew, and I am the Executive Director of Homegrown. And it is my real honor to wish you all a happy FFN Appreciation Week. This is such a joyful week, and I have just loved reading the articles, watching the videos, and hearing the testimonials about the role that family, friend, and neighbor care plays in each of our lives. Each of these stories underscores a clear theme, that of love. The care work of family, friend, and neighbor caregivers is about love and about wanting the very best for children and their families. FFN Appreciation Week is a chance for all of us to say back to our FFN caregivers that we love you too, and we are so grateful for all that you do. Before I dive into our afternoon, our webinar together, I want to take a moment to recognize my teammate, Vanette Pierre, our communications manager at Homegrown. Vanette developed the idea for FFN Appreciation Week that launched for the first time last year. Her vision and hard work is reflected in the excitement and the expansion of the FFN week. And I'm so grateful to you, Vanette, for making this happen. So let's get started and dive in. A little bit of housekeeping. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you are joining us from. And today we will be using the Q&A function. So if you have questions, we invite you to share your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And we hope to have some time toward the end of our discussion to answer some of those questions. Next slide, please. Today, our agenda is really looking at how we are moving towards transformational policy change in this country that centers the needs of family, friend, and neighbor caregivers. So we will start our discussion by meeting and hearing from home-based childcare providers who are powering this movement, who are both providers but incredible advocates for themselves and their peers. We will hear from state leaders about states that are really leading the way to make change on behalf of family, friend, and neighbor caregivers. And then we will also look forward to opportunities for federal policy change that can make meaningful improvement in the lives and livelihoods of family, friend, and neighbor caregivers. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time for questions, and then we will close out with some resources. Next slide, please. We are so lucky to have so many incredible advocates joining us on this call today. Joining me from our team at Homegrown is Joycelyn Felix, our Community Partnerships and Learning Manager, Marta Corona, who is a family friend and neighbor caregiver from California, Elizabeth Arnold, who is currently a family childcare provider, but a former FFN caregiver from Nebraska, and her partner in crime, Shannon Hampson, who is also a family childcare provider and former FFN caregiver from Nebraska. We are also joined by Ruth Evangelista, who is both a family friend and neighbor caregiver and the co-founder of an FFN-led network in Minnesota. Lorena Garcia, who leads the Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition and is a state representative in Colorado. Crystal Johnson, who is a fearless state administrator with the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services, and Andrea Peluso, the co-leader of the Child Care for Every Family Network. Next slide, please. So we're going to start our discussion really hearing directly from care providers who are both caring for young children and their families, but also caring for each other and advocating on behalf of family, friend, and neighbor caregivers in their community. So I'm going to start and ask Marta to get us started. Marta, can you share with us a little bit of how you got started caring for young children?
Claro que sí. Hola a todos. Yo inicié hace 18 años, estaba recordando con mi sobrina que mi hermana tenía la necesidad de regresar a trabajar y con un mes de nacida me dijo, aquí está mi hija, te la dejo en tus manos y adelante. Entonces ella tenía una necesidad, yo tenía amor por mi sobrina y entonces así fue como inicié. Después de eso fue mis hijos, los amigos de mis hijos, familiares, de hijos de mi familia, de mis sobrinos, y así es como yo inicié como FFN.
Thank you, Martha, for sharing a little bit about how you got started. Next, I'll turn to Elizabeth Liz, who is now a family child care provider in Nebraska, but is a former FFN caregiver. Liz, can you share a little bit about how you got started and your journey as an FFN to a family child care provider?
Thank you for having me today, and I am impressed with how many people are on here. That is so cool. I was family friend neighbor. I started in 2011-ish. It's kind of hard to pick a date because I had my own kids, and then you're just kind of watching a neighbor once in a while, and then you're watching a friend's kids once in a while, and then you're like, wait, I think I have a business, and yeah, I see Christine from Logotad is on here, which is awesome. Logotad is great for everyone. So I just stumbled into it. I was helping a neighbor's kids. Her house had a major flood and she needed someone to watch them because they had to close her house down. And I just loved it. So from 2011 to 2020, I was license exempt. I have 5 of my own kids. They counted my ratios. It didn't make sense for me to get licensed. I am not that much different of a provider now as a family child care than I was as a family friend neighbor. I think my biggest difference is I advocate. I have a louder voice because I have more confidence. I have the correct letters behind my name. So I feel like I have the responsibility to speak loudly for people who are marginalized and not treated as well by our states and our federal government and even by other providers, unfortunately. So that's my big my big reason for doing it. I became licensed in 2020 because in Nebraska, COVID funds were not able to go to people who were not licensed. So in order to get any COVID funding, I had to become licensed, and that was really probably the only push for me.
Great. Thanks, Liz. Shannon, you too are a former family friend and neighbor caregiver who has, made the change to be a family childcare provider. So we'd love to hear from you a little bit about how you got started.
Hey everyone, I'm Shannon and I'm in Lincoln as well. And kind of similar to everyone else, I was watching my kids' friends, and it probably wasn't even until years later that I was like, oh wait, I was a family friend neighbor provider, not just a friend watching kids. And I think that's similar probably for a lot of people. You don't even realize that that's what you are until after the fact. And so that's how I started as well. And then I had a neighbor who had childcare subsidy and wanted me to watch their kids. So I started doing that. And I provided untraditional hours. So I was providing care, early hours, afternoon hours, overnight care, weekend care. And I just kind of continued that. And I was running 24/7, and kids were coming in as kids were walking out the door. So I was in those ratios, and I thought about becoming licensed, but didn't because I was renting and I wasn't able, my landlord wouldn't allow me to get the hardwired smoke detectors. So I couldn't become licensed. And when I finally purchased my own home and then struggled through the cost of getting those installed, I became licensed. And part of that reasoning was most of the families I was providing care for at that time were childcare subsidy. And in Nebraska, we were getting paid $13.50 a day. So to survive on $13.50 a day and to provide quality care was kind of hard. So I went through that venture of getting licensed, and I'm still 24/7. I provide care on weekends for military families that go to drill. I am open earlier than most providers to let families come or stay later. And so that's kind of where my journey has gone. And just like Liz, you called us partner in crimes. And I think usually in our state, if you hear one of our names, everyone thinks the other because we work together. Where her strengths are, my weaknesses are, and vice versa. So the two of us together, we get pretty far in advocating and don't give up. We like to persist. And we were both family friend providers or neighbor providers. And so we know the value of them, and we know quality care is there. And we know that we need to continue to help support those providers as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. Martha, I want to turn back to you and ask if you can share some of the challenges that you and other family friend and neighbor caregivers face in your work. And what are some of the policy solutions that you are working to achieve in addressing these challenges?
Claro que sí. He notado que algunos de los retos que tenemos como proveedoras es que no se tiene el reconocimiento de ellas. Muchas que yo he conocido es la barrera del idioma, que también se les dificulta para obtener la licencia y para acercarse a más fondos federales. Es otro de los cuales yo he visto y he escuchado es la falta de documentación legal. Entonces, esa es una gran barrera que también he escuchado muchísimo de proveedoras. Para mí ha sido muy enriquecedor pertenecer en estos grupos. Yo he pertenecido a mi nivel local desde hace 4 años en un grupo donde estamos alrededor de más de 100 personas, FFN, desde abuelitas hasta mamás, tías, y deberían de ver todo el entusiasmo que tienen estas personas, primero por aprender y apoyar a los niños que tienen en su cuidado. Entonces, yo pienso que sí es un grupo en el cual tenemos que apoyarnos todas y tratar de lograr políticas diferentes para todo este grupo de proveedoras.
Thank you, Martha. It's really amazing that you've been able to bring together such a big group of caregivers to advocate for change. Liz, I'd like to ask you, sort of reflecting back on your time as an FFN caregiver, what kinds of needs were top of mind for you? And what are some of the policy changes that you're advocating for on behalf of and alongside FFN caregivers in Nebraska?
I needed support, and Nebraska especially does not support their family, friend, neighbor providers at all. Actually, they don't even know that's what they're called. They post all the time they're unlicensed, and I'm constantly correcting, you're license exempt. You're a family, friend, neighbor, and you have value in that. And don't degrade yourself by saying, I'm an unlicensed provider. You probably give excellent care. So I would love, Shannon and I have tried to build a network of license exempt providers. It's been very difficult because I feel that they think there's a trick to it. And literally, I just want to build a foundation of providers that we can go to and talk to. And what do you need? How can we help? How can we use our voice to bring you up and equal to us? And so they have the support of each other to talk to one another. So we've been trying with surveys and reaching out to people on Facebook who post that they're license exempt, but it's been really, really hard. Um, why do I advocate on behalf of other providers? I stumbled across a stat in our CCDBG grant from the 2020 early years, not the current one. And it said that I want to say 57% of contracts were given to families that were license exempt. And license exempt care gets paid minimal. It used to be $13.50. It's up to around $16 a day if you're in Lincoln, which is not enough to provide care or to survive at all. And it made me mad. So I started talking about to anybody who would listen. And I had another provider across the state say to me, why the F should I care about license exempt providers? And my thought was, it was really sad, because if you don't want to care about another person who's working the same job as you, a peer, maybe you should care about those kids. And at what point do those kids matter? And at what point do we step up and say, the choices of the adults shouldn't reflect on the financial status of their care? That's why I advocate, and I hope to continue to build something in Nebraska, like all this wonderful stuff that's coming up.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Shannon, kind of similar question to you, but I wonder if you could share a little bit about the FFN toolkit that you all have been developing and how you got funding for the toolkit. And maybe if you want to share a little more about why you think it's important for family child care providers to advocate alongside FFN caregivers.
Of course. So the family friend neighbor toolkits actually came, Liz kind of touched on some of those bases, is that all of that COVID funding, there was nothing for those family friend neighbor providers. And Nebraska's on a big push of, we want to increase the quality of care across our state. Well, how do you increase quality of care if you leave a huge portion of providers out who are providing care and not increasing that quality and supporting them to increase that quality as well? And Liz actually approached one group first and said, hey, we have this idea, will you fund it? And they absolutely turned it down. And about a week later, I was in a meeting. They're like, we have this grant money and we have no idea what to do with it. I was like, me, please. And so then I explained it to them and they absolutely jumped on board. Liz and I worked tirelessly at finding great deals, and we have 7 early learning guidelines in Nebraska. So we made sure that those quality improvement kits had something from every single one of those learning guidelines, and then also included some social emotional. And we're like, what items do we think are good for this? And we researched, we got those together. We put them together. I think we made 31 kits. We were limited to just Lincoln alone because that's where our funding was coming from. We created these kits. We also made a resource for the providers of things that they could participate in that included family, friend, neighbors, had it binded, had it completed, and then we were able to hand them over to the licensing department or childcare subsidy, sorry, who would then deliver them to those. Because in Nebraska, they choose not to publicly list who receives childcare subsidy or who has those contracts, and they weren't willing to release those names with us. And I think we really shocked them when they saw those kits and really saw the quality of the items that we put in there. And then they've said that they want to recreate those kits and provide them to all of those providers that have childcare subsidy. So they're currently working on that funding to be able to recreate those kits for those that have those contracts with them. And then I think it's for that second part of your question, I think it's super important whether we are licensed or family friend neighbor or a center. I think in general, if we want to educate our communities about the importance of our jobs and our profession, we need to work together. We can't leave one section out, whether you're a childcare center, a family home, family friend number. If we leave one of those out, we are not going to make the progress we can make if we work together. And every one of us is important in providing the care to those children. So we are the future for those children. And if we don't support us all and make sure that quality is across the board, it's the children that are going to suffer and not get what they need. And we're just not going to make those movements that are needed within legislation working alone.
Totally agree. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Martha, Liz, and Shannon, for sharing more about your work. And hopefully we can include you in the Q&A later in the discussion. I want to transition now to Ruth. Ruth is both a family friend and neighbor caregiver in Minnesota, but she is also the co-founder and leader of a network. Sounds like you did a busy lunchroom. Ruth, I'm going to turn it over to you to share a little bit about the work that you do at LaRed.
Buenas tardes, buenos días y buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Ruth Evangelista. Yo soy una familia, amigo y vecino, cuidadora de mis nietos, de mis hijos, pero empecé hace como 22 años cuando llegué a este país a cuidar niños, sin saber que era una proveedora de cuidado infantil. Después de ese tiempo empecé a reunirme con mujeres en el 2013 y supimos que el cuidado infantil en nuestras familias migrantes es escogido por la mayoría de nosotros, por nuestras abuelas, nuestras tías, nuestras vecinas, que son para nosotros como los padres, para personas más confiables y seguras para cuidar a nuestros hijos. A pesar de la gran demanda de los servicios de apoyo para el cuidado infantil de familias, amigos y vecinos, nos dimos cuenta que esto era escaso. La mayoría de los recursos disponibles aquí en mi estado, en Minnesota, estaban destinados a guarderías formales, proveedores con licencia y padres que podrían pagar tener acceso a entrenamientos. Fue que en este tiempo, hace 10 años, formamos una red de proveedoras de cuidado infantil a la que le llamamos la Red Latina de Educación Temprana, para proveer acceso a los servicios, a la educación temprana y tratar de eliminar barreras que enfrentábamos nosotros los proveedores de cuidado infantil en nuestra comunidad, así pudiéndoles brindar entrenamientos de calidad, oportunidades educativas y desarrollo de liderazgo a nuestros miembros. Next, please. Algunas de las actividades de nuestra red de proveedoras es que nosotros tratamos de entrenar en lo que es desarrollo infantil. Algunos grupos de CPR, primeros auxilios, desarrollo saludable en la primera infancia, nutrición, síndrome de muerte súbita y del bebé, que son cursos que pide el Estado para cualquier proveedora que tenga una licencia. Algunas de las actividades también es entrenar cuidadores de niños para ofrecer este cuidado infantil de alta calidad en una diversidad de temas. También abogar por los derechos de las familias, referir a familias en búsqueda de cuidado infantil con cuidadores dentro de la red. Y por último, lo que hemos hecho a través de este tiempo es continuar el desarrollar el liderazgo de nuestras proveedoras. Creo que tenemos que desarrollar líderes en nuestras comunidades que alcen la voz y que sepan que no solamente somos unas niñeras, sino que hacemos también un buen trabajo para el cuidado de nuestros pequeños en la comunidad y sobre todo ofreciéndoles esta calidad y el amor que muchas veces no se ofrece, ¿verdad? También pues estamos dispuestas a trabajar con cualquier organización y grupo que abogue por nuestros derechos. Nuestros derechos es que nos escuchen, que nos den diferentes beneficios para seguir desarrollando estos grupos de proveedores, familias, amigos y amigos, no solamente en mi estado, sino en otros estados también. Y creo que trabajando juntos podemos hacer de la educación temprana en este país algo exitoso, porque el beneficio sería para todos los niños de este país de 0 a 5 años para que lleguen a ser exitosos en su vida adulta. Next. Algo que ha hecho la Red Latina es abogar por cambios en políticas públicas, fortaleciendo el liderazgo, las capacidades de nuestros miembros. Ahora hemos incluido a muchos miembros de mi organización, de la red, a que sean la voz de otros que por diferentes situaciones o estatus no pueden hablar. Entonces hemos tratado de ir directamente con las personas que hacen el cambio y dejarles saber todo el trabajo que toda la gente de familias, amigos y vecinos hacen a nivel de la nación y en cada uno de nuestros estados. Eh, Esto es un gran ejemplo. Agradezco mucho el que nos tengan aquí y también escuchar de otras proveedoras de otros estados el gran cambio que queremos hacer y creo que todo esto es en beneficio de nuestros niños. Next.
Thank you so much, Ruth, Martha, Liz, and Shannon for sharing the incredible work you do as both caregivers, providers, but also as advocates for your peers. We're going to move now to hear from two state leaders who are really making significant changes both in legislation and in administrative actions on behalf of family, friend, and neighbor caregivers. It is my great pleasure to introduce Lorena Garcia, the leader of the Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition and a Colorado state representative, and truly one of the most fearless FFN advocates in our country. Lorena?
Hi, everybody. Good morning here in Colorado. It's exciting to be here and to be with all of these amazing people and all of you who are listening in and all the incredible work that all of you do as well. It's an honor to be able to share how FFN providers lead the way in Colorado. We can go to the start. So what I'll be talking about today is really how CSPC and our community of FFN providers has really dramatically shifted the landscape of support for FFN in Colorado. Next slide, please. So what do we do and how do we get it done? Well, we always start by listening. So we listen to the FFN providers we work with. CSPC, in addition to doing policy advocacy work, we also work directly with FFN providers in providing professional development. And through that, we learn and hear and observe a lot of the challenges and the barriers that get in the way of our FFN providers being able to thrive. Then we engage, we act, we together with our FFN providers, we take on these challenges and these barriers. After that, we work with our policy team and our grupos de lucha, and we inform our community about changes that have happened and new rights that our communities have. And then we do it again and we listen. Did it work? Did it help? Do we still need to do more? So we engage in this, like, what I consider this beautiful cycle of feedback where we never consider a policy win as the win itself. A lot of it is a long-term commitment, the implementation, what is the direct impact? So we can go on to the next slide. So what have we actually then accomplished? Well, there's two phases of FFN policy in Colorado. One I consider pre-CSPC, one I consider post-CSPC. And what I mean by that is not our existence. I mean that in the sense of when CSPC really started to engage politically. So in 2016 was the first time in a very, very long time that the state of Colorado decided to increase the number of children that FFN providers could care for. They reached out to CSPC. CSPC provided insight and input into what our FFN providers doing. And so they raised the number from 2 children total to 4 children under 5 or 2 under 2. Well, this law had to get reauthorized in 2018. And in 2018, CSPC was not engaged. So they reauthorized this law with a very stigmatizing component. And what they did in this law was they required FFN providers to have to post in their home that they were unlicensed. Yeah, just hang on to that. So at that point, we weren't investing in policy work. CSPC wasn't. We weren't doing bill work. We weren't doing that type of work. So at that point, we said, this can't happen again. They cannot do anything without involving those who are directly impacted, and those are the FFN providers. Go to the next slide. So in 2019, in a group that CSPC and many others were a part of called the FFN Strategic Action Network, and FFN providers and other advocacy groups got together and we're trying to figure out what can we actually do to support FFN providers. And our FFN providers were very clear. They said, help us get licensed even if we don't have a social security number. So since 2019, we started working on a bill. 2020 came, COVID came, the legislature shut down. We couldn't bring our bill. So we brought it back in 2021. But we brought it even bigger. So before in 2019, it was just around making sure that people who had ITINs could get a childcare license. But over the course of time, the conversation started growing, and we started hearing and learning and getting input and feedback. And our providers were saying, but this isn't enough. Because not only should we get the privilege of getting licensed, everyone else that has a profession should be able to get licensed. So we decided to tackle that entire thing. And in 2021, we successfully were able to eliminate the requirement for a social security number for state public benefits and to become licensed in any professional, occupational, or commercial license. In 2022, we knew that the professional development that was happening because of CSPC and our partner organizations weren't reaching enough FFN providers. And as all of you know, FFN providers also want professional development. You don't have to be licensed to want professional development. People who are caring for kids always want to be learning how to do better and how to do more and what to improve on. So we had an opportunity to allocate and run a bill that dedicated $7.5 million to FFN professional development at the state level. This was the first time in the state history that the state invested in FFN care. The caveat is that this is ARPA dollars, so it's temporary. In addition to investing in professional development, It also created the very first position of an FFN administrator and an FFN statewide advisory council that advises CDEC on FFN issues. In 2023, CSPC applied to be the implementer of this FFN grant, and we won that contract. And we're literally in the middle of reviewing proposals for other organizations across the state that are serving FFN providers. In 2024, we ran 2 separate bills. One was a total state subsidy revamp. And in that, one of the biggest challenges that, as many of you know, comes up is access to food support. Prior to this, in 2022, 2023, behind the scenes, CSPC, because of the pushing and the leadership of our FFN providers, CSPC worked with a small group of partners and the Department of Early Childhood and the Department of Public Health to expand access to the CACFP program, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, to qualified licensed exempt providers. However, in order for that to happen, they had to be subsidy accepting providers. So it's directly linked to the subsidy program that the state has. That's problematic because the subsidy program, not every provider is caring for a kid that qualifies for subsidies or is engaging in receiving those subsidies. And on top of that, the state itself doesn't have enough to cover every child that qualifies under subsidies. So in this bill in 2024, we directed the Department of Early Childhood and the Department of Public Health and Environment, Public Health and Environment, to develop a process that would allow FFN providers to access CACFP without having to also be a state subsidy eligible provider. What we also did in this bill is, because we know in Colorado, in order to become an FFN provider, licensed qualified exempt provider that receives the state subsidy, the parents have to initiate it. That's problematic and it's bureaucratic and it makes it challenging. So we also instituted a pilot that allows FFN providers to initiate their own process and become a subsidy accepting provider, similar to licensed. So essentially they get added to a list. And if parents are looking for in Colorado it's called CCAP, parents are looking for a CCAP provider, they are added on that list. What I want to say though, is a lot of this investment, a lot of this work, while it looks like 1 year after 1 year after 1 year, has literally been the work of nearly 20 years of working with and for FFN providers. Some of the folks on the call, I want to call out Valerie Gonzalez, who's with the Office of Children Affairs, who used to be with CSPC leading our PASO program, led the charge for many, many years. And now she's leading the charge at the city of Denver. We're able to prove that investment in FFN care at the state levels is effective because we've had longer term local investment of FFN care through the investment of this Office of Children Affairs in the city of Denver. And I want to say that all of this, one more bill, it's really, really cool, is we also passed a caring economy tax credit. If you're a carer, you're a child care provider, including FFN, if you're a home health care provider, personal care provider, a nurse assistant, in 2026, you will qualify for a $1,200 non-refundable tax credit for the year of 2025 and 5 years beyond. This is the first time ever that we're actually investing in a care economy tax credit. Even if it's only $1,200, we are demonstrating, we're showing that we believe and want to invest and support those that are keeping our loved ones safe and alive. So this is really exciting for us. And we still have a ways to go in Colorado, but you know, this is where we are. And whenever FFN providers a couple of FFN providers are here that have been very, very engaged in this whole process. So it's great to see all of you. And we will continue to listen and to act, engage, and inform and keep going in that cycle to continue making significant impact for FFN providers.
Thank you, Lorena. You are an inspiration, and the work that is happening in Colorado is really inspiring. I want to turn it now over to Crystal Johnson, who is a child care administrator in the state of Nevada, a state that has also really prioritized family, friend, and neighbor caregiver through its child care funding. Crystal, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey everyone. Really just touched by everything everybody has said so far, and honored to be here and be championing a lot of this work with all of you that are doing, all of you that are doing it. I think it's important to touch on what Elizabeth Arnold said earlier about the providers and how they see themselves as, you know, if unlicensed or if they're not licensed. We really try to stay away from that verbiage also and stick with license exempt. These providers are absolutely operating legally. They are running businesses. They do not have to be licensed. That is a choice that in Nevada, we really are wanting to meet the providers where they're at. And ultimately, it's about the care of those children and offering those quality care supports and what we can do as a state to put systems in place so that the children still have the care that they need at the end of the day is something that's been really important to us. We've done a lot and I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go really quickly through a lot of the things that we have done. It's important to know in Nevada, we have a 24-hour economy. It is a childcare desert. There is just not enough childcare, you know, in centers or things like that. And ultimately, it's up to the families. Even in CCDBG, in the you know, law and regulation, it really talks about parent choice, family choice. So it's up to those families to decide where they want to place those children. So we put all kinds of supports in helping build up all childcare providers, including our FFNs. So one of our solutions that we had focused on, all of this was done with COVID funding, was our Nevada Strong Start Childcare Services Centers. So I am now the statewide manager over both of those centers. They're physical locations in both Reno and Carson City. And then we also have a virtual online platform where providers can receive all kinds of services for free. We have a resource center here, laminator, Cricut machine. My daughter calls it the biggest craft room she's ever seen. The providers can come and utilize all of the services, make copies. There's meeting spaces, meeting rooms. We have a meeting room where they can bring children. Actually, the playroom is above me if you hear noises, because there's meetings here today, parent trainings, and the kids are here physically in the building. So we created the spaces for the providers that we really want them to feel like it's theirs and they have a place in the system. So that's a big part of where this came from. It's our one-stop shops, as we like to call them. Next slide. Another piece that echoes some of what everyone was talking about earlier was being able to listen to provider voice and use that as a driving force in what we're doing at the state level. And for us, that was directly impacted by our ability to raise provider rates. We had done listening sessions and meetings with our FFN providers, and I actually presented, and every one of them sat in the room and said to me, "It's great, you've done all these things, but we're not getting paid enough money." So ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Like, all of this stuff doesn't matter. We can't get approved for home loans. We're not making enough money, and we're not going to on the current model. So I took that back and I really pushed for change with our rate increase. Our rates had not been changed in 20 years, which I know is similar to what some of the other states are dealing with. And so in May of 2022, we did receive approval to increase those rates. They were increased across the board, almost by 50% across the board. And what we did was we structured it so that it's 75% of the rate of licensed family childcare for whatever the category is. So for example, right now in Clark County, which is Las Vegas, in an infant setting, a registered FFN gets $33.75 for that reimbursement rate, for that daily rate. So the hope is that whenever we raise rates then across the board, that rate would then also go and default to that 75% of that base rate. So the other thing that was really important to me personally was, you know, I sat there and I told everyone, yeah, we got these rates approved, we're going to raise them. And then we have system issues in place that prevented us from actually putting those rates in place until January of 2023. And so what we did with our COVID funding was we went back and essentially did a retroactive reimbursement to make up for that rate difference of $2,000 a month. For these FFNs, all they had to do was be providing care in that month, and they received the check. So some of them received checks up to $14,000 that they did not know was coming. So that was something that I was very happy that we were able to do that and get that approved, to be able to stand by what we said as a state and say, we're doing this. We made it happen. We followed through. Understand we had bumps, but here we are. So exciting about that one. Next slide. So something else that we did was, again, those same conversations of this is great. We really created pathways, what we called pathways to licensure during COVID. And even despite everything we were doing, we had providers that came forward and said, I still am never going to get licensed because of my housing situation. And so we had a situation where we had unallocated funds with one of the COVID rounds of funding, about $8 million. And so I asked permission from administration can I take those funds and do something with it related to housing? And as a result, we have our Care Nevada project. This was targeted toward family, friend, and neighbor providers specifically, people that were not licensed and wanting to get licensed in a group family childcare setting. So that was the big piece, is they had to be able to not have been licensed and then go into a group setting. And they are matched with a home. There's a lot that goes into it. It's hard to get in a really short period of time, but basically the providers are vetted. There's an application process. If they're matched with a home, then they have an opportunity to move in. The rent is about 15% below market rate. There were other wraparound services that we included as a part of this in order to get the providers on this pathway to licensure. And then after renting the home for 2 years, the provider has an opportunity to purchase the home, and then they would get an equity split in the house of any equity that had been gained as a result of this. And so this is Mission Driven Finance is our partner. They administer care in other states as well. It's a little bit different of a model than what we do in Nevada. I think we actually talk about the model on the next slide. Yeah. So you had to have 2 or more years of providing childcare experience in a home-based setting. The model that they were doing in other states was with licensed providers that were licensed for small like group childcare or family childcare, wanting to go into group family childcare. But for us, we said we really want to target those that cannot get licensed and are desperately wanting to. So how do we focus in on that? And so that's how we came up with these. They needed to be willing to serve subsidy, willing to expand, housing identified barrier, and they had completed a business training course that we put together. So if they go through, they're qualified, they're matched. As I think on the next slide, this was as of last month. There had been 15 homes purchased, 10 had been matched, 9 had been moved in, and 5 of them, as of now, have completed the licensing process. So we had 1 since I last presented this in July that's already completed the licensing process as well. We also paired with Early Head Start to provide some stable contracted slots in these. So some of these providers are Early Head Start providers. So that's an additional way for them to supplement their income. And Head Start has provided a lot of wraparound services and supports for them as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal. I know that there's a lot of interest and we are really running out of time. So leave us your questions. We will also send lots of follow-up materials. Thank you, Crystal. Very inspiring programs. We're going to turn now to federal policy. I'm going to ask my colleague Joyce and Andrea to just share some big ideas on federal policy, and then we're going to wrap up. But please know that we will share all these materials with you via email and make sure that you can learn more about some of the things you've heard about today. So we can go to the next slide, and I think just go to the next slide. You know, all of what we're learning from the states is really building, I think, hope and optimism that we can move something federally in the future. And so I want to turn it over to Joyce to talk a little bit about federal FFN policy and action group, as well as then my colleague Andrea at the Childcare for Every Family Network to talk a bit about the kind of bigger picture for childcare. So Joyce, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to be high level and fast.
Sure, I'll try. Thank you, Natalie. Yes, hi, my name is Joycelyn Felix, and I am very excited to talk to you today about the Homegrown's work with national and state partners to advocate to advance federal policy agenda on behalf of the FFN caregivers and the families they serve. About a year ago, my colleague Mertes and I, on behalf of Homegrown, initiated the FFN Vision and Action Coalition alongside a group of national and state organizations that share our commitment to FFN care. So the group met for several months, understanding the landscape and determining that we need a proactive policy approach, not simply a reactive approach, and that this approach must be informed by the lived experiences and wisdom of FFN caregivers. So we have met since February, and FFN caregivers join our cause because our commitment is to do this alongside with FFN caregivers, not just create something for them. So if we go to the next slide, what we're trying to focus is, since we have this vision, right, that FFN are not longer marginalized within the childcare system, we want to see FFN providers with the respect and dignity as a valuable human being they are. Person with values, and they're able to transmit those values to little ones, right, and help our communities. We're here to listen and lift our voices and advocate for the providers and the providers' needs. So what we are trying to do in the federal agenda is we're developing a proactive federal policy agenda, and these are the emerging priorities. The FFN is value in the childcare system, and FFN caregivers are compensated with fair wages and benefits. Migration status, issues of FFN caregivers, the children they serve, and others in their household pose a barrier for participation in childcare systems. To their livelihoods, addressing these issues is essential. Secure enough financial stability for families and providers through mechanisms such as the expanded child tax credit can support improved outcomes for FFN care. FFNs and their families they serve face many hardships related to financial security, post-trauma, and marginalization. The job of an FFN caregiver is physical and emotionally taxing, and both caregivers, young children, and families need access to mental health supports. And housing is a major issue for FFN care. Access, affordability, and childcare policy related to housing threaten stability for FFN care and are a high priority for federal policy and action.
Thank you, Joyce. You did an amazing job in a very short period of time. I'm now going to turn it over to Andrea.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to join you all. I just appreciate FFN providers so much, as does everyone at the Childcare for Every Family Network. So thank you so much for including us. I'm going to put a link that I hope everyone can see into the chat so that folks can learn more about the Childcare for Every Family Network and some of our work, and also hopefully sign up to join us because we're happy to have more folks joining the effort. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the network. So what you're seeing in front of you here is a shared vision for the real transformation of a national childcare system that we'd like to see. and the values that drive our work. So to say about the network, part of what we were recognizing when this network came together, and it's really still coming together, it was launched just a couple of years ago, was that we needed to have more alignment around what we're trying to win. Like, what is our North Star vision for what a national childcare system looks like? We needed to have work that was in more alignment to these values, that's led by families and providers, that's bold and proactive, that is spanning local to national, that is centering women of color and BIPOC folks. We need more power to win what we're trying to win. And what are the efforts that we're undertaking together to build that power? We need more movement infrastructure, more local and state campaigns that are supported to scale their work, more work to connect the local and state efforts to the national demand from Congress to fully fund a universal childcare system. And we need to build more transformational wins, as you all are doing, to really demonstrate the power we have and how our demands work for families and for providers. So we have a network that now has about 1,500 members that are childcare providers, parents, organizing organizations, advocates at the local and state and national level. And I'm charged a little bit today to tell you about kind of the national policy effort. So when we started, there were some existing pieces of legislation around childcare at the national level that we felt like could be better informed by parents and providers, by organizers, by advocates on the ground across the country. So when you're asked to give feedback to an existing bill, I think a question that emerged for us was, well, what are our principles? We have these values, but what are the principles in policy that really drive how we give feedback? How close is it to our North Star? What do we like? What do we not like about it? And what do we really want to see? Because we're often in a position of responding to what folks feel like is possible today, but we're not often in a position to be able to say what we really need and what we really want our system to look like and what it will take to get there. So if we did that, we started a process which many folks from Homegrown were engaged with to draft a set of policy principles that are now driving the creation at the national level on our part of a vision bill that is truly a North Star. If we didn't have to make compromises because politicians are asking us to make compromises and we didn't have to, really worry about what feels like it could pass today. What do we want? What is the vision for what a national childcare system that brings all of our providers together without making them compete against each other for scarce resources, that really meets the needs of our kids and families? What would that look like? So we're in the process of developing that now and of supporting more of our local and state providers and organizations to be a part of that national effort, and supporting some of the local and state campaigns that folks are launching that are really in alignment with more transformational demands. So I hope you'll join us. That's a very quick overview, but we are deep partners with Homegrown and really appreciate all of you, and we really look forward to winning together.
Thank you, Andrea. We're proud to be a partner to the network and excited for the opportunity to bring forward transformational federal childcare legislation. Unfortunately, our very small amount of time has disappeared, so I'm going to encourage you all to visit the FFN Appreciation website. We'll drop the link in the chat. There are some resources there that you can use in your conversations in your communities about why family, friend, and neighbor care is so important to young children, to families, and to their communities. So please visit that site. We want to share here a new resource from a partner in California. The CCR&R network and First Five of LA have a podcast series focused on family, friend, and neighbor caregivers. And we know that this will offer really informative insight to those of you learning about FFN and advocating for FFN. Lastly, we encourage you to sign up for our, our newsletter. If you want to join the Policy Coalition, we welcome you. If you want to get connected with any of the partners that joined us today, again, we welcome you. And then very lastly, I really just want to say thank you so much to all of the organizations and individuals who joined us in sponsoring and being a part of FFN Appreciation Day. More so than anything, we want to say to the family, friend, and neighbor caregivers on this call and across the country that we are so grateful and so appreciative of the work that you do every day. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our speakers and presenters for all of this great information. We will share an email follow-up that links to all the information that was shared today. So if you missed something, you will get it. And again, thank you all so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.